I believe Big and Tupac was in-house. All had something to do with death row people.
Just when everyone thought the Tupac case was finally closed for good, the feds spun the block with a wild new arrest that flipped everything upside down. If Keith D was just the fall guy all along, this new arrest might point straight at the real mastermind behind the whole thing. He's been holding back a name that prosecutors have supposedly kept locked up in the dark for months. And when that name finally drops, the whole case could explode like never before. The streets are buzzing hard right now. Word just broke about a brand new arrest in Tupac's murder case, and it came out of nowhere. It's like the cops have been hiding a secret bombshell for nearly 30 years. This isn't some rumor or wild online theory. This is real news, real cuffs, and real heat. And the moment it hit the headlines, everyone started looking sideways at one man, Keith D. Yeah, the same dude who's already behind bars, already talking, and already waiting for his day in court. Because if this new arrest connects the way insiders claim it does, Keith's whole version of events might finally crack wide open. What a lot of people don't realize.
But Davis's attorney says no law prevents that until a person is convicted.
Right now, his son, myself, even he can enter into a contract with any media entity and make money on this case.
Is that there were 4 people inside that white Cadillac when the shots went off on September 7th, 1996. 3 of them, Orlando Anderson, DeAndre Big Dre Smith, and Terrence Bubble Up Brown, are all gone now, leaving Keith D as the only living witness who truly knows what went down that night. The whole story is about to get wild again. But that doesn't mean the investigation ends with him. Far from it. Prosecutors just dropped info from a 2006 interview with another former gang member who actually named Davis as being involved in Tupac's murder. And here's the crazy part. This person gave that statement years before Keith D ever started speaking publicly. That means someone else out there knows the truth and already told the cops long ago. But the real bombshell? The whispers about who might have been calling shots behind the curtain. He himself has been pointing fingers at Reggie Wright Jr. Yeah, the former head of security at Death Row Records. And that's only scratching the surface of who could have been connected to what went down that night. The picture might be way bigger than anyone thought.
As the man who is now charged with the murder confessed in 2008 that he was involved and has been saying it very openly in interviews that he handed the gun to a guy named Orlando Anderson, his nephew. And Keefe's story is that Orlando pulled the trigger and fired the shots into the car, which Suge Knight was driving. Tupac was the passenger.
While the media has been zeroed in on Keith D sitting tight inside the Clark County Detention Center, the streets got bigger questions. Who else knew what was coming that night? Who else had inside info and never said a word? And why did it take 27 long years for anyone to face charges when clearly more than one person knew what happened? The silence has been too loud for too long. Now, let's rewind to how we even got here. On September 29th, 2023, Las Vegas Metro finally rolled up on Dwayne Keith D and charged him with murder in connection to Tupac Shakur's death. But don't get it twisted, this wasn't some shocking cold case breakthrough with some new DNA or a hidden weapon suddenly showing up. Nah, this all came to light because Keith D just couldn't stop talking about his role for years. And when you talk too much, the streets and the law both start paying attention.
That was all West Coast, bruh. That was all in-house. If you ask me, that was all in-house.
So you believe Tupac and Biggie murder was in-house?
I believe Big and Tupac was in-house. All had something to do with death row people.
This man's been everywhere. Interviews, documentaries, podcasts, you name it. If someone handed him a mic, he was talking. He even wrote a book called Compton Street Legend, breaking down his life in the streets and what went down around Tupac's case. He sat with law enforcement more than once and turned into the go-to voice for almost every documentary covering unsolved hip-hop mysteries. And here's the wildest part. Every single time he spoke, he kept saying he was right there in that white Cadillac the night Tupac was shot. That's a bold thing to keep repeating on camera. But the question is, why would anyone keep admitting that publicly? Why would someone keep bringing up being involved in one of the most famous cases in rap history? The answer? Keith D thought he had protection from charges thanks to a deal from way back in 2008 and 2009.
But speaking out of turn, Davis says he believes those boxes came from retired LAPD detective Greg Kading, who interviewed Davis as part of the investigation into the death of rapper Notorious B.I.G. In a recorded interview, Davis told Kading what happened in Shakur's case, believing he would have immunity.
When the LAPD was digging into Biggie's case, they brought Keith D in and gave him what's called a proffer agreement. It's basically a legal deal where you can talk freely about certain things, and what you say in that specific meeting can't be used against you. But Keith totally misunderstood what that meant. He thought the agreement covered everything he ever said about Tupac's case, no matter when or where he said it. That was a serious mistake. Those profit deals only protect what's said inside that official meeting room. They don't give anyone a free pass to go on interviews or online shows and retell the story like it's entertainment. And they definitely don't protect you if you're turning that story into a money move by writing books or getting paid for documentaries. Let's rewind and break down what really happened that night, because the timeline explains exactly why Keith D's arrest might just be the start of something way bigger. September 7th, 1996. Tupac and Suge Knight had just left the Mike Tyson fight at the MGM Casino.
Keefe D and his entourage get into a white Cadillac. Along with Keefe D, the driver is a guy named Terrence Brown. They call him Bubble Up. Behind the driver is DeAndre Smith. He's in the left rear passenger seat. And Keefe D's nephew, Orlando Anderson, he's sitting behind the right front passenger seat.
Inside the casino lobby, Pac and the Death Row crew ran into Orlando Anderson, a Southside Compton Crip who had allegedly tried to snatch a Death Row chain a few weeks earlier. Things got heated fast, and the whole altercation ended up getting caught on the MGM surveillance cameras. After that, Pac and Suge took off in the Suge Knight black BMW, headed to Club 662 for the night's after party. Around 11:15 p.m., they rolled up to a red light at Flamingo Road and Coven Lane. Out of nowhere, a white Cadillac pulled up on the passenger side, right where Pac was sitting. In that moment, shots were fired, at least 13 rounds in total. Tupac was hit 4 times, once in the lung, another in the pelvis, and also in his hand and thigh. Suge was grazed by shrapnel but managed to survive. 6 days later, on September 13th, Tupac passed away at just 25 years old. The world's biggest star was gone, and the mystery around it has haunted hip-hop ever since. Now here's the wild twist.
That's a very strong comment to make, man.
Listen, it came from their own mouth. DJ Quick. I think they got one of them bad boy niggas. They said they was gonna get him. Who was they? Had to be Death Row. Somebody affiliated with them.
Keith D admitted he was sitting in the front passenger seat of that white Cadillac. He even said the weapon came from the back seat where his nephew Orlando and Big Dre was sitting. But when it comes to who actually fired the shots, that's when Keith suddenly goes quiet and dodges the details fast. Orlando Anderson was questioned back in the day but never charged. Not long after that, he lost his life in a Compton shootout in 1998. Big Dre's gone, Bubble Up's gone. Basically, everyone who could have backed up what challenged Keith's story is no longer here. That left him as the only one still around and the only one still talking. But while Keith D was out here turning this story into interviews, books, and headlines, Las Vegas prosecutors were quietly watching, collecting receipts and building their case. Then on July 17, 2023, they made their move. Detectives executed a search warrant at his Henderson, Nevada home, and what they found raised eyebrows. They uncovered documents and materials that lined up with a lot of the things he'd been saying publicly for years. Just 2 months later, they came back and arrested him.
We would have never seen him. My partner busted you. When we pulled up, I was in the front seat. Happened to see my friend, Suge.
Suge looks over, he sees you.
Yeah.
He looks right at you.
But here's where things get even crazier. This arrest might not be the grand finale. People close to the case, some who were actually around that night, are saying Keith D's version of events doesn't quite add up. That's a serious claim. Now imagine this. If people connected to Death Row Records really has something to do with Tupac's murder, that changes everything. The story about it being a simple gang retaliation, that falls apart fast. Suddenly, the MGM fight looks less like a random moment and more like a setup, something carefully planned to make the attack look spontaneous. And that brings up some heavy questions. Was Keith D and his crew being used by someone else behind the scenes? Or were they just in the right place at the exact wrong time, while others made sure Pac would be caught off guard? The story being pushed is that it was all just random, that Keith D and his crew were cruising around looking for anyone from death row to get back at, and by pure chance, they happened to spot Pac sitting at that red light. But a lot of folks in the streets just aren't buying that version at all. Too many coincidences.
I don't know Keith D like that to be, you know, singing about no murder stuff like that. I believe he even lied about his nephew and everything. I know he said if he goes to jail for Tupac, Reggie should go to jail for Biggie.
Too perfect a timing, and way too many people who might have had motives that went way beyond street beef. Something about it just doesn't sit right, which brings us right back to the biggest question. Who else was really involved? Because prosecutors went ahead and charged Keith D, even though he admits he wasn't the one who pulled the trigger. Legally, since he was allegedly part of the crew that carried it out, that still makes him responsible under the law. But if that same rule applies to him, shouldn't it also apply to everyone else who played a part? What about the person who supplied the weapon, or the ones who supposedly tipped them off about Pac's location that night? And what about those connected to death row who some witnesses claim were actually celebrating after hearing Pac had passed? If that's true, it changes everything about what really went down and who stood to gain from it. That's the talk running heavy through the streets right now. People are convinced there were bigger names in play, individuals with more power, more reach, and way more to lose if the full truth ever came out. When Keith D got booked and hit with a first-degree murder charge, most people figured he'd stay quiet, let his lawyers handle the talking, and play it smart. But that's not how Keith D operates. From his very first court appearance, he's been moving like he's starring in his own documentary instead of sitting in front of a judge facing the fight of his life. And since his arrest, the courtroom drama has only shown how messy and layered this whole case really is.
You know, let's get one thing straight, first and foremost. You know, me and Keith D played on the same Pop Warner football team. And whatever the circumstances, if he had an involvement with anything, if he didn't have any involvement in anything, who want to see? I wouldn't wish somebody going to prison on my worst enemy.
The first big issue his defense team threw out there, the immunity question. Keith D's lawyers argued that everything he ever said, whether in interviews, his book, or public appearances, should be protected under the proffer agreement he made with law enforcement back in 2008 and 2009, when he was questioned about Biggie's case. According to them, because he mentioned details about Tupac's situation during those sessions, and since investigators from the LAPD, Las Vegas PD, and even federal agents were aware of what he said, that deal should have covered him completely. But prosecutors weren't buying it, not for a second. They fired back hard, saying even if Keith D had limited immunity for specific talks with detectives back then, that deal doesn't stretch to all the interviews and public confessions he's been given over the years. Once he started going on camera and podcasts and on social media retelling his version of events, that protection flew out the window. Even more importantly, prosecutors pointed out that Keith D wasn't just talking, he was making money off his story. They claim he'd been cashing in through book sales, getting paid for documentary appearances, and turning his own reputation into a full-blown income stream. But under Nevada law, you can't profit from crimes you admit to being part of. And the fact that he was earning off those confessions, prosecutors said,
when he looks over at you, and then, Tupac's busy getting shot. Evidently, the story is Tupac's trying to either get out
in
of
the
the
back seat or something.
Yeah, what do you see happening inside of their car?
I seen a bullet going through his head. I thought he was dead.
Showed that he knew exactly what he was doing and wasn't as innocent as he tried to sound. The judge seemed to lean toward the prosecution's side on that one. Multiple motions to dismiss based on Keith D's so-called immunity deal were flat out denied, and the case kept moving forward. But that wasn't the only drama going down in the courtroom. Things started getting tense fast. During one especially heated bail hearing, Keith D lost his cool and began speaking out of turn, clearly upset about the way prosecutors were portraying him and even his family. He didn't like the way they were using certain evidence against him, and it showed. What really set him off were the boxes of files and transcripts the prosecution pulled out from the old investigations. They dropped a bombshell in court, revealing they had a 2006 interview with another former gang member who named Davis as being involved in Tupac's murder. an interview done years before Keith ever started talking publicly. That was a major moment because it proved law enforcement had evidence tying Keith D to the case long before he began doing interviews or writing books. The whole question of bail quickly turned into another huge point of tension in court. The judge made it clear she was uneasy about letting Keith D out, worrying he might try to keep making money off his fame while awaiting trial. On top of that, she had serious questions about where the bail money was coming from. Was it clean, or was someone trying to use the case to benefit themselves behind the scenes? Things got complicated fast.
Well, Tuesday's hearing centered on that new evidence. The main reason was Davis's bail, the judge denying Davis's first attempt over concerns the man putting up the more than $112,000 was really a middleman. She also said she was concerned Davis could profit off the alleged crime.
Then Keith D's defense team threw out an argument that really got people talking. They pointed out that technically, under Nevada law, there's nothing stopping someone from making money off their own story, unless they've been convicted. In other words, as long as Keith D hadn't been found guilty yet, his lawyers claimed he had the right to keep profiting from his version of events. That created one wild situation, because here you had a man charged in one of hip-hop's most infamous murders, possibly earning cash by retelling the same story that landed him in court in the first place. It was like a legal paradox. The same interviews and confessions being used as evidence against him were also the ones he could legally still profit from until a verdict came down. The judge wasn't thrilled about that gray area, and the whole courtroom could feel the tension rising. But things went from strange to explosive when Keith D decided to speak up for himself, pointing fingers and naming others he believed should also be under investigation for unsolved hip-hop cases. Reggie Wright Jr., the former head of security at Death Row Records, was the name that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. This wasn't some wild or random accusation tossed out of nowhere. In what sounded like a desperate move, Keith D implied that if he was being held accountable for Tupac's murder,
Tell me what your reaction is to the arrest of Keefe D.
Well, surprise number one, because I didn't think Keefe D would never get arrested. Nor do I want to see him get arrested.
then Reggie Wright Jr. should also face questions about Biggie's case. That statement turned heads instantly. Reggie Wright Jr. has always been a controversial name tied to both investigations. As the head of security for Death Row Records and the son of a Compton police officer, Reggie Wright Sr., he sat in a rare position linked to both the streets and the badge. Over the years, countless documentaries and investigative reports have raised the same questions. What exactly did he know? When did he know it? And was he connected to any part of either murder? So when Keith D dropped his name, it felt like he was playing two moves ahead. His comments seemed to have a double purpose. First, to shift some of the spotlight off himself and redirect it towards others he thought should be questioned. And second, to challenge the simple gang retaliation story that prosecutors have been pushing for years. Was Keith D hinting that people inside Death Row Records might have had their own reasons for wanting Tupac gone? Was he suggesting that the fight at the MGM and the shooting that followed weren't just random street drama, but part of something much deeper and more calculated? As time went on, the case only got more tangled. The trial date kept getting pushed back. What was originally supposed to happen much sooner.
I ran the door at the 662. I seen Orlando and them when they pulled up in the Cadillac. When I told my homies, Southside's up here. My homies that was at 662, everybody had their guns. We knew it was gonna be something.
Got delayed all the way to February 2026. Keith D's defense team argued that they needed more time to find and question witnesses, go through stacks of old evidence and dig deeper into what they called decades-old claims that might actually clear his client's name. They claimed to have new witnesses who could place Keith D somewhere else entirely when the shooting happened, and they insisted they couldn't rush the process if they were going to build a solid defense. Meanwhile, the prosecution wasn't slowing down one bit. They kept stacking evidence, from Keith D's own recorded words to years of interviews, book excerpts, and documentary footage where he openly described his role in the events surrounding Tupac's death. On top of that, investigators had the materials collected from the 2023 search warrant in his Nevada home, plus statements from people who were in Las Vegas that night and could back up key details of the timeline. Even though the physical evidence was nearly 30 years old, the forensics still held weight and painted a clearer picture of what went down. And under Nevada law, things get even heavier. You don't have to be the one who actually fires the weapon to face a first-degree murder charge. The law follows what's called the felony murder rule.
You said the shots came from the back. Big Dre, Orlando. Who shot Tupac?
To keep it for the code of the streets. It just came from the backseat, boy.
Meaning that if someone dies during the commission of a felony and you were part of that group, you can be held equally responsible for that death. So even though Keith D has never said flat out that he pulled the trigger and always maintained the shots came from the back seat where Orlando and Big Dre was sitting, he's still on the hook by admitting he was in the car, played a role in what happened, and that the incident was payback for the MGM altercation. Prosecutors say that's enough to hold him accountable under the law. The streets really started paying attention once social media jumped in. Every single court hearing was being live tweeted, dissected on YouTube, and debated across hip-hop forums everywhere. Suddenly, the case wasn't just a courtroom drama. It was an online event. Public opinion split right down the middle. Some folks said Keith D was finally facing the consequences after years of publicly talking about his connection to the case and turning it into profit. Others believed he was being used as a scapegoat, a convenient fall guy who talked too much, while the real masterminds behind Tupac's murder.
Those boxes contain a 2006 interview from a gang member who prosecutors say implicates Davis in Shakur's murder.
Makes that statement 2 years before any confession the defendant ever made.
Was still walking free. The debates got intense. But here's where it gets even murkier, the bigger picture. Because even though Keith D's arrest looks like a slam dunk based on his own words, plenty of people, especially those who were close to the death row era, aren't fully buying the gang retaliation story that's been pushed for decades. They're saying that version of events doesn't tell the whole truth, or maybe it's not the truth at all. And one of the loudest voices saying that is none other than Marion Suge Knight himself. Suge was sitting right next to Tupac when the shooting happened. He was driving the black BMW that night and even got grazed in the chaos. He's one of the few people still alive who actually witnessed it all go down up close. From behind bars, Suge has been speaking out, and what he's saying completely clashes with Keith D's version of the story. Think about that for a second. Suge Knight, the man who was right there in the car with Tupac, the man who survived that ambush, the man you'd expect to want justice more than anyone on the planet, and yet he's saying he don't want to see Keith D arrested. That left everyone asking the same question. Why would he say that? Sure, some people think Suge is just being diplomatic, maybe trying to keep the peace or showing loyalty to someone from his old neighborhood. But there's another way to read it.
All Southside Crips.
One of the homies said Death Row guys were going to have a concert at the 662 Club. So we went to the 662 Club.
And that's the version a lot of folks in the streets are whispering about. What if Suge doesn't want Keith D behind bars because he knows Keith D isn't actually the one responsible? What if this arrest is doing the opposite of bringing closure? What if it's blocking the real truth from ever coming out? That's where another long-running theory comes into play, one that digs much deeper than any talk of gang retaliation. According to this view, both Tupac's and Biggie's deaths were inside jobs, orchestrated from within the industry itself, specifically tied to people with power inside Death Row Records. And the alleged motive? Not street beef, but money, power, and control. The claim that figures connected to Death Row could have had a hand in both murders is explosive. And it's not just being spread by random internet voices. This idea has been quietly circulating among insiders, former affiliates, and even industry veterans for years. Here's how the theory goes. By 1996, Tupac was becoming harder and harder to control. He wasn't just an artist anymore. He was a force. Reports say he was preparing to break away from Death Row entirely, start his own label, Machiavelli Records.
They're not only ugly on the outside, but they're ugly on the inside too.
Dwayne Keefe D. Davis lashing out at prosecutors during another hearing about releasing him on bail.
And take a big chunk of Death Row's talent with him. That kind of move could have shook the entire power structure of the label. There were major rumors floating around that Tupac was planning to audit Death Row's financial records and expose some serious irregularities. And if that was true, it could be disastrous for certain powerful people. In this version of events, The MGM Grand fight with Orlando Anderson wasn't the reason for Tupac's murder. It was the cover story, a convenient excuse to make it all look like street revenge, when in reality, it might have been something way more deliberate and calculated. According to this theory, all the details that night just line up too perfectly. Keith D and his Southside Crip associates were supposedly out looking for death row members that night. They happened to be armed, they happened to spot Tupac and Suge at just the right moment, and they happened to pull up right when Pac's car was stopped at the light with the windows down. Everything about that timing feels too clean, too synchronized, too perfect to be random. That's why a lot of people believe Keith D and his crew might have been played, used without even realizing it. They could have been positioned exactly where someone else wanted them to be, while the real mastermind stayed hidden behind the scenes. And when you really think about it, the questions just don't stop. How did Keith D and his team even know Tupac and Suge were headed to Club 662 that night? How did they know the exact route from the MGM to the club? And how did they just happen to end up at that same intersection at that exact moment when Tupac's BMW was sitting still at the red light with the windows down? Was it really just coincidence that night? Or was someone feeding Keith D and his crew inside info about where Pac would be? That question has haunted this case for decades. Everything about that setup felt too precise to be random. People say we knew something was gonna go down, but then something unexpected happened that might have completely thrown off whatever plan was in motion, if there even was a plan to begin with. Tupac and Suge never made it to Club 662 that night. They got stopped at that red light on Flamingo and Koval, and that's where everything exploded into chaos. Keith D himself described that moment in vivid detail over the years. And here's what's always stood out. He's been super careful with his wording. He's admitted to being inside the car. He's admitted to sitting in the front passenger seat. He's admitted that the shots came from the back seat. But when it comes to who actually pulled the trigger, whether it was his nephew Orlando or his associate Big Dre, he always dodges the question, staying vague and quiet. Some people believe Keith D stays vague because he's trying to protect his late nephew's name and doesn't want to throw him under the bus publicly. Others think maybe he honestly doesn't know, because in that chaotic moment, with adrenaline pumping and everything happening in seconds, it might have been impossible to see exactly who fired the shots. If the real truth ever came out, it could expose something way bigger than simple ring retaliation. That's what makes this whole case so powerful and so frustrating. It's forcing hip-hop to confront one of its darkest and most painful chapters, the mid-1990s East Coast versus West Coast feud. That era tore through the culture, destroying lives, breaking up friendships, and forever changing the entire landscape of rap. Tupac Shakur and the notorious B.I.G., two of the most iconic artists of their generation, were both taken way too soon, right in their prime. And here we are, nearly 27 years later, still piecing together what really happened and why. Every new twist just adds more layers to the mystery. According to the latest court filings, there hasn't been another arrest directly tied to Tupac's case besides Keith D. But the trial itself has hit constant delays. It's now pushed all the way to February 2026 after the defense requested extra time to investigate what they're calling new evidence. Keith D's lawyers claim they've got fresh witnesses who can allegedly place him somewhere else when the shooting went down. And if that's true, it could seriously shake the prosecution's whole argument. They're building their defense around the idea that this case isn't as airtight as prosecutors make it seem. Adding to the drama, Keith D caught new legal trouble in January 2025 when he was charged with battery after an alleged altercation behind bars. Prosecutors are now pointing to that as proof he's still a risk and shouldn't be released before trial. Meanwhile, his defense team has been hitting back hard. They filed multiple motions challenging the evidence, including one in October 2025, asking the court to suppress materials taken during the 2023 police raid on his Nevada home. Their claim? That investigators broke protocol during the search, and that evidence should be thrown out. Even though that suppression motion was later withdrawn, it still raised some serious questions about whether parts of the prosecution's evidence were even solid to begin with. And then there's the Diddy angle. one of the most controversial parts of this entire case. Keefe D has claimed in past interviews and in his 2019 book that Sean Diddy Combs once offered $1 million for a hit on Tupac and Suge Knight. Those claims reportedly came from statements Keefe D made back in the 2008 DEA interview. But let's be clear, Diddy has strongly denied every single bit of that. His legal team called the allegations completely false and even took legal action to fight what they said were made-up claims damaging his reputation. No actual evidence has ever surfaced to support those accusations, and law enforcement has repeatedly stated that Diddy was never a suspect in Tupac's case. Still, the fact that these claims keep popping back up, especially now while Diddy faces his own separate legal controversies, just adds another wild layer to already tangled story. At the end of the day, Keefe D's arrest has created more questions than is answered. If he's eventually convicted, will that really mean justice has been served for Tupac? Or will it just mean that one man took the fall while the real power players, whether tied to death row records, law enforcement, or something even bigger, continue to walk free? The truth is, this case isn't just about one man. It's about decades of mystery, betrayal, and secrets buried deep in the world of hip-hop. Thanks for watching. If you want to keep diving into stories that pull back the curtain on hip-hop's most shocking mysteries, hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and click one of the videos on your screen to keep the story going.